All right, guys, so today I'm going to talk about TRT or testosterone replacement therapy. It's something I get a lot of questions on, and if you watched the recent Q&A with myself and Abel, we discussed a situation somebody asked about where they wondered if they had gone on TRT for a little bit or even a couple of test cycles, could they get to or above their natural limit and then maintain that? And so, with it being such a prominent topic, I want to kind of dive into it and some of the potential issues I see with it. So, if you saw a video by influencer Merijn, I believe his name is Merijn, he talks about how he, after 10 years of lifting, more or less hit his natty max. And then he went on TRT and he goes into some very relatable reasons about how he stopped progressing, how he wanted to be fun again. And I think it's a good video to watch and we can link it here, but I think it shows a lot of the common issues of what the beliefs are going into it and ultimately what gets a lot of people to stop. Because many people find that they get their testosterone levels checked and maybe it's not as high as they want. They see somebody like Lane Norton who has levels 900 plus, maybe even 1,000 plus. I think he had a recent video showing that. And they think, well, why are my levels like that? And I know Lane says, well, he has a healthy lifestyle. But the reality is, even most people with a healthy lifestyle will not have levels that high. And there are many people with very impressive physiques who have levels in the 400s, 500s, 600s. And, there are also many other factors that play into what your physique is going to be aside from just testosterone levels. If you look at the research that James Krieger has put out there, it shows that on average, about a 100 nanogram per deciliter increase, again, on average, results in about half a kilogram or 1 pound of muscle. Now, that is significant, right? Somebody who, if you were, let's say, two twins, and for one reason or another, they had natural levels at 900 versus 300, potentially 6 pounds of muscle, which is fantastic, right? I mean, that's a big difference. But we see that the variance between individuals is much greater, right? There are people at the same height with 20 or 30 pounds more or less muscle. So there are many other factors that go into your physique aside from just testosterone levels. Now, what are some of the big issues I see with people going on TRT? I mean, first of all, it's extremely easy to get it prescribed. Okay. I mean, I knew people doing this even 10 years ago, talk about this on the forums, but nowadays, I mean, it takes almost no effort. There are so many doctors online who will prescribe even just based on symptoms. They literally will not test your testosterone levels. You say you're tired, you're lethargic, you have low libido, and you can get testosterone. And a lot of these places, I mean, it's truly amazing that they're not shut down. They will be prescribing sometimes up to 500 milligrams of testosterone as your weekly dose, which again, just shocking that this exists. Some places will even prescribe peptides, Anadrol, other things. And at that point, I mean, I'm not even really going to discuss that because that is so extreme and so ridiculous that exists. But I know a lot of listeners who think about maybe going on TRT. And I certainly don't think TRT is a bad thing in general. I think it's all context specific. The fact that it can be so easily manipulated, the fact that you can get chronically poor sleep for a little while, that you could be chronically dieted and manipulate your levels to get TRT shows that there are a lot of issues with how it's prescribed and that we're not addressing it. Now, to be clear, I'm not somebody who says you have to have a perfect lifestyle before you even consider these things, right? You'll see this sometimes with people who, with the obesity epidemic, and they'll say, well, if these people had a better lifestyle, it's like, well, look, that is true, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't also consider drugs that could help them, right? If we can come up with drugs that reduce appetite or glucose, that has better glucose control for diabetics, maybe they would be better off with diet, but let's not ignore the problem and the lack of compliance with most people and not try to have medical innovation, right? I think both are relevant. So I'm not saying that if you're tired, lethargic, your testosterone is 200 or less nanograms per deciliter, that you need to be doing everything perfect. Sometimes you can't have a perfect life, and so things need to, maybe that's somebody who, if they've gone through the right processes, might want testosterone. But I'm just pointing out that it's very easy to manipulate it, and you really have to have good oversight. Now, I will have to say that there are a lot of people, including people who, I know personally, who it's almost like a meme. If the guy, that Marin guy, his video, he originally talked about how he had a doctor prescribed or doctor overseen medical procedure. And it's like, okay, man, like you were chronically lean, like super lean all the time, stressed out. And to his credit, he very much says he actually didn't need it. But that person, that, persona is so common in the fitness industry that I've never seen so many people who supposedly need TRT, even though they are otherwise healthy in their 20s, and somehow supposedly all these people need TRT because of some issue that they have. I think largely it's a lot of BS, and frankly, it's a lot of these guys I know. I do not believe for a moment that they are only on, a true TRT for most people is going to be somewhere between 80 to 120 milligrams per week of testosterone. Now, that is something that you need to look at your blood work for based on your total testosterone and your free testosterone. But most people are going to be in a good, healthy range. I know doctors who, without thinking about it, will prescribe 200 plus, which most men are going to be well above normal at that level. And a lot of these guys who are on TRT, they are either on TRT after years of blasting higher doses of steroids, or they're still doing that intermittently. They have a couple cycles per year, but hey, they're just on TRT. And I'm sure we can all think of people who are in the industry who claim this, and we know what's really going on. And again, it's not to shame it. It's just about, understanding that what you're seeing may not be achievable. And I have numerous clients who are on testosterone replacement therapy, and a lot of them you would have no idea, which is to say that while testosterone replacement therapy can be beneficial, and there's been a couple people on my podcast who talked about how they were 20 pounds heavier on TRT. Well, in my opinion, more than likely these are guys who used at one time, and keeping, let's say, 150 milligrams of testosterone per week allowed them to maintain much more muscled physiques, and even somebody like a John Meadows who was very open about it. If you look at him on 200 milligrams or even 100 milligrams per week of testosterone, he was dramatically more muscular than he ever was as a natural, and probably more than almost anybody could be as a natural. So that's another factor to consider. The physiques that you're seeing, one, they might not actually just be on TRT. Two, if they are truly just on TRT and not high dose sports TRT with growth hormone and some other peptides, I mean truly just TRT, then you still have to consider what is their history, and they might be maintaining far more muscle because of their previous history. Your average individual who is taking 100 milligrams per week is probably going to be a little bit more muscular than if they had not taken it. But that is because the 100 milligrams per week might bump them up to the upper normal range, and then they're going to keep those elevated levels rather than having the daily fluctuations that happens with the circadian rhythm. That is not going to be happening. They're just going to be elevated more or less all the time, especially depending on how frequently they're injecting. But you're not going to see these dramatic changes. And as I mentioned, a number of my clients, you would just have no idea that they were on anything, because they are the people who truly need it, who might be in their 40s and 50s and have, a long history of symptoms despite what they're doing. Now, one thing I will say is, as far as reasons not to do it, so what are some potential reasons that you might not want to be on TRT? I think the reasons for it are pretty obvious, right? You might be more muscular, have more energy, greater sex drive, and these can all be great things. And a number of people truly love being on testosterone replacement therapy. And I in no way would demonize it. I know the first part of this video is sounding very negative towards it, but I think for some people, TRT can be fantastic. I more just roll my eyes at the people who claim that they need it when they're a young, healthy 25-year-old, and they say that they need it because whatever nonsense. I mean, if you look at somebody like a Steve Hall, who actually had a legitimate reason that he could go on it, and I believe he was on it for some short period of time, even coming off of it afterwards, he has continued to make fantastic progress and looks amazing. And I think he is just an evidence of somebody who, even though he actually could have justified being on it, went the route of not being on it and is still making great progress. So that is just something that it's important to keep in mind. But we do know that there are potentially a lot of great benefits to it. And if that is the reason that you can be healthier, that you can, have more muscle, be more active, and therefore have a lower body weight overall and just live a healthier lifestyle, then I think that's great. I mean, the reality is We have some studies out there that show potentially some problems with TRT. We have other studies that show basically no net benefit or issues with it. And then we have some that show a benefit with it. But as far as potential consequences, a lot of these studies that show issues, they're very uncontrolled. It's like, well, patient was on testosterone. Well, what does that mean? Well, they were just prescribed it. Okay, no follow-up to see what their estrogen was, no follow-up to see what their DHT was, no follow-up on prostate health. They're just looking at overall, maybe risks for like how many cardiovascular outcomes and mortality did we see. And that is really not a good way to go about it. I think if you had an individual who happened to be somebody who was overweight and, it gave them more energy and got them motivated, and that individual got into a healthy body weight range, I think their net result is that they're going to be healthier. So in no way am I trying to demonize it at all. But let's talk about some of the reasons that you might not want to, right? I mean, one is if you start, and this goes back to one of the questions in the Q&A, you are not going to maintain anything from it when you come off. Now, I've mentioned it several times that if you blast steroids and then go to TRT, sure, you might maintain more muscle. But if you just go on TRT and then say, hey, after a few years, I'm done, I'm coming off completely, you are not going to maintain pretty much anything. And there are countless examples of people who have come off. I think there was a recent example, if you looked at somebody like Pete Rubish, very impressive individual naturally, extremely impressive individual enhanced, came off, and basically my understanding is he's basically back to where he was natural, which is still, in my opinion, very impressive, but didn't net anything because he came completely off. Versus if he had, and I think he even said that on the podcast we did together, that when he was on TRT, he maintained the vast majority of his progress. But when he went completely natural, he lost almost everything beyond what he had as a natural. So don't think that this is something that you can do short term. This is a lifelong commitment. You will likely have increased DHT, which can lead to more acne and hair loss. The data on prostate health is a little bit ambiguous at this point, so I won't touch on that, but it is interesting to see some of the stuff coming out on that. The one thing that I think is totally ridiculous, that I'll take this moment to briefly rant, are the people who say, oh, well, I don't want to pin myself, or I don't want to pin myself for life. And it's like, man, there are so many legitimate reasons that you don't want to shut yourself down for life, right? I mean, if you want to have kids, it's going to make it significantly harder. There are the potential health risks I mentioned. But I think the reason of I don't want to pin myself is actually an incredibly weak and lazy reason, considering that, we are people who will eat as many times as we need to per day, 3, 4, 5, 6 times per day. We will get all of the sleep we can. We will buy whatever supplements that could maybe help us. We will go to the gym 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times in a week. We will do our cardio. But taking whatever, a minute to inject yourself, that's your reason. I think that's actually a very poor reason, and I think there are many reasons not to do it, but I think that's kind of a ridiculous one. I think a great resource on this topic is Dr. Thomas O'Connor. There are occasionally some things I see him say that I don't fully agree with, or that I've seen contradictions in the literature, but frankly, there aren't a lot of people doing what he's doing, and with the amount of free information he puts out there, I think he's a fantastic resource, and I think that he is somebody who says, yep, you know what, he's on TRT, he used to use steroids. I think before he was more open about that, most of us could probably tell that, and I'm glad to see that he's open about that, but he really, I think, does try to help a lot of people who have maybe made mistakes and help them recover. And he says that for most people, you probably shouldn't be, but he understands that he was on it for a very long time and that he needed to be on it. But I think he's a great resource for people who want to delve further into that. But a final thing I want to say, and this goes back to the video on Merijn, is that when he talks about that there are other things that you can do, and of course this is something that I've run into myself, where it's like, hey, I've been lifting for coming up on 18 years. So anybody who's watched the channel has probably heard me say, started losing weight when I was 10, started getting into more activity at 12, and actually started a legitimate programmed intense routine at 14 years old. Okay, so it has now been at very least 16 plus years of all out training, doing things correctly. And I really haven't seen any net progress as far as actually having more muscle in about 5 years. And that makes sense, right? At 10, 11 year mark, not a lot is going to be happening. And that can be kind of demotivating, but I think he makes a great point that you can look at other ways to quote unquote progress. And I'm very careful with how I say that, because some people will act like they're always progressing. I'm still hitting PRs and I'm still doing this, and maybe they are, in some certain circumstances, but they're probably not gaining that much net muscle. But there are different things you can do. So for me, I focused on some strength lifts that I had not focused on before, to the point where I was able to hit a pull-up PR this past summer. And, we're talking, it's a small PR, but it gave me something to strive towards. He talks about getting into calisthenics. That is something that I've considered myself. And it's hard because if you don't actually care about it, then I wouldn't suggest having it as a goal. But I think that there are a lot of things that you could do. You might pick up strongman. You might pick up powerlifting. You might just do something outside of lifting, right? There are a lot of things. And he makes a great point that you kind of get into this fitness bubble where this is all that people do. And I think back, I was in college and everybody was lifting. And then, I was in dental school and a lot of people there, surprisingly, were actually lifting too. And you then are on a podcast and you're in the fitness world. And it is this bubble where everybody's doing it. But in the real world, most people really don't care that much. And, let's just take an example. Let's just take two individuals, both 200 pounds. One is 16% body fat and one is 12% body fat, right? So let's say that the one who's 12% body fat, they're enhanced. And so they, if you do the calculations, 200 pounds, 16% body fat, that's 32 pounds of fat. The person who's 200 pounds, 12% body fat, that's 24 pounds of fat. So that person who is leaner is going to have 8 pounds less fat and 8 pounds more muscle at the same body weight. That's a huge difference, right? To us, that is dramatic, right? To even have 8 pounds more muscle, period, but to have 8 pounds more muscle and 8 pounds less fat, dramatically different physique. 98% of the normal population is going to see two guys who are just 200 pounds at quote unquote normal body fats in clothes. Not that they wouldn't be able to see any difference, but they're going to look basically the same. I've had this experience myself where guys who were significantly less serious than me, but about the same weight, the people were like, oh, you guys are about the same. And I remember thinking, like, hold on, like I'm actually significantly more muscular than this person. And I've had the opposite happen where somebody was clearly more impressive than me and people said, oh, you're about the same. It's like, no way, this guy would trounce me on stage, but that's just not what the average person sees. And it's not that you should focus on what other people see and care about. It's to say that if you were to take some time and do another endeavor, get into something else and kind of get out of that fitness bubble where you feel like you need to get every last 1 to 2 pounds you can get, and that's the reason that you're going to go on TRT. I think you should step back and maybe do something else and not make an emotional decision. Really try to think about it logically. So this is going on a little bit of a longer video, guys, a little bit ranty, but I've really noticed in the last year, seriously, probably a third of my clients either are on TRT or asking me about TRT. I'm seeing it more and more, and I think it is becoming very common. And I think given the age of a lot of these people, it's something that you need to step back and consider. And is it something that you really want to be obligated to take for the rest of your life? I think TRT is great, really great for the people who need it. But I think you really have to consider the investment that goes into being on that for the rest of your life, emotionally, financially, just everything that's going to go into that for your health. And really make sure you're consulting with a legitimate doctor who understands it before making any decisions. So that is it, guys. If you have further questions, feel free to post in the comment section below. If it's something that's a little bit more private, you can DM me. Happy to answer any questions there. Obviously, nothing here is medical advice, and I highly recommend actually talking to a medical doctor that you can actually meet and go through any questions you have. So again, thanks guys, and subscribe for more like this. Give the video a thumbs up, and I will see you next time.